In tonight's episode, we're going to talk about how behavior modification becomes its own special form of punishment. Good evening, Facebook family. Welcome to another episode of Post Daily Dose. With me, your trusted parenting advisor, faithful guide and servant on the healing journey. What's my name? Big Papa Brian+Post. I hope everyone has had a fantastic day. It is so cold here in Oklahoma. I'm talking cold, and it's getting more cold as I speak. So wherever you are, I hope that you are warm, because I know that your hearts are warm. So tonight's episode, we're going to talk about how behavior modification becomes its own special form of punishment. And I'm going to continue on the theme of, hello, Ashley Marie Torres. Oh, you finally caught it live. That's right. I'm going to continue on the theme of being stuck in the parenting matrix, because being stuck in the parenting matrix is a catalyst to creating behavior modification for children. When I talk about behavior modification, I'm talking about points and rewards. I'm talking about the special charts you put on your walls. You know, red light, yellow light, green light gives children warnings when their behavior is starting to get to a certain level. If you really think about it, how is red light, yellow light, green light any different from 1, 2, 3 magic? It's always interesting to me, especially when I start talking to you guys about this stuff, how I see the similarities in the things that we commonly do. But one of the big ones, and what happened, I bet it is cold in Michigan, Peggy. One of the reasons this came up is I was doing a coaching call with a mom and her therapist just the other day. And we were talking about this young man, 16. So we're not talking about a small child. We're talking about a 16-year-old. But trauma knows no age, and that's what you need to understand. Most parents who follow Big Papa are raising children who have experienced trauma. And sometimes you don't even know it. But trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. So you can have a child, if you've got a child with some serious behaviors, you probably have a child who's experienced some form of trauma, and most likely you may not even know about it, especially if you're a caregiver or if you're a teacher. You probably don't know what that trauma is, because trauma happens in so many ways, so many variations of ways. But if you're dealing with severe behaviors in an ongoing way, and let me tell you this, in fact, let me give you this to think about. If you're raising a child who for 6 months or longer has struggled consistently, when I say consistently, I mean at least every other day. So at a minimum every other day, with some varying degree of behavior problems, you probably have a child who has experienced trauma. And I want to ask you something right now. I'm going to ask you to just give me a scale of 1 to 10. Where would you say, 10 being the absolute worst? And some of you don't really have a perspective of what the absolute worst is, because I've seen the absolute, I've seen so severe in behaviors. 10 being like the absolute worst that you can imagine. Let's say that. 1 being, mild. So children who haven't experienced an extreme amount of trauma. I mean, my own children, my 23-year-old and my 15-year-old have both experienced extraordinary amounts of trauma. And you could say that they have been raised in as normal and consistent of a home with parents as any children in the world. And they're 2 very well-adjusted children, but they've both experienced significant amounts of trauma. So I just want to give you some perspective. And so if I was grading myself and grading my own children, as I'm asking you about to do, I would put my children, between a 1 and a 3. So on a spectrum, on a continuum of 10 to 1, 1 being no behaviors at all, 1 to 3 usually falling within a normal range, 3 to 5, falling in more of a mild behavior range, and then 5 to 7 falling in the moderate, and then 8 to 10 falling in the severe. Let's look at it that way. Where would you put your child? Because if you would put your child anywhere, I would say a 5 and up, you're probably, and this could be even if you're a caregiver, and I keep saying that because I saw my cousin pop on here. Hey, Kirsten, how are you doing in the Netherlands? If you would put your child anywhere from a 5 and up, you're probably dealing with a child who's got some kind of trauma experience in their life, or some exposure, some ongoing exposure to stress, which changes the way the brain handles stress. So very, very important. And then if you've been dealing with these behavior challenges, as I was about to say, for 6 months or longer, that in and of itself is an environment that is operating at a high enough level of stress that everyone is experiencing some level of trauma. So some level of secondary trauma, because everyone is stressed out in the dynamic. So I want to give you a real clear perspective of how trauma doesn't know age. And when you're working with your children and you're trying to raise them, I want you to be thinking about, you may not realize what they've experienced. I mean, you could be a foster parent or an adoptive parent and may not realize what they've gone through. You could be a biological parent whose child maybe you had birth trauma, and you haven't even really thought about the fact that you were in an extended labor, or the fact that there was some high degree of stress, or you got sick while you were pregnant, or your baby was breech, or there was a cesarean, or there was an umbilical cord wrapped around their neck and the oxygen levels were low. They could be 5, 10, 15 years old now. You don't even think about that anymore, but those experiences shape the brain. Hey there, Lisa. I miss you, kiddo. It's so nice to see you. Those experiences shape the brain and have an impact on the way your children interact in the environment and socially and emotionally. And the reason I say that is because this young man was in a special school, and the school was going on, and I want you to follow me here, the school was going on a trip to Universal Studios. And so he worked really hard for 2 weeks to be able to go to Universal Studios. And this is a young man who's got some social and emotional challenges and early history of trauma. And he worked really hard for 2 weeks to go to Universal Studios, and he was able to get there. So he was able to get the reward. And then as soon as he got there, he ended up going to the little gift shop and stealing something and getting in trouble. So the perspective from within the matrix is that he worked really hard, and I want you to hear this. I want you to follow this. I want you to understand the wool of the matrix. He worked really hard to get there, and then he blew it by making a bad choice. And so then he gets punished. Then he gets looked at as a bad child. How oftentimes does this happen? How oftentimes has this mindset invaded your own consciousness? You as a parent, how many times have you allowed this mindset to invade your own consciousness that says, my child has worked really hard and then she just went and screwed it up, right? That's so common, isn't it? That's the matrix. That's the matrix. Because guess what? Everyone around this young man felt the exact same way. Even his therapist felt that way. Even his mom felt that way. They just thought, you know what? He worked really hard, which tells us, it tells us he's able to hold it together. He's able, so here's the mindset. The mindset is he's able to choose his behaviors. He chose to behave so he could get the reward of Universal Studios. And then when he got there, he chose to screw it all up. So it's all a matter of cognition. This is the wool speaking. That's the mindset of the matrix. It's confusing, isn't it? So as I sit there telling you that story right now, I can feel the confusion that you have, because there is so much conditioning in your consciousness right now, in your psyche, in your parenting psyche, that says, yeah, well, isn't that the case? Isn't that the case? Didn't he do that? Didn't he choose? I mean, he did actually work hard to get the reward. Didn't he mess it up? That's the matrix talking to you. That's generations and generations and generations of misinformed, conditioned belief patterns. Because when you break outside of the matrix, here's what happens. Number one, you understand that this young man has severe trauma. Number two, you understand that he doesn't want to be left out. But you also realize that behavior modification always fails traumatized children. And it always fails traumatized children because they're the ones who ultimately always get in trouble and never get the reward. But if you make the reward big enough, and if you create enough pressure, listen to the words. If you create enough pressure, the child will work hard enough to get the reward. So you just have to make the reward bigger, right? That's what the matrix says. So then you make the reward bigger, but here's what the child's brain does. The child's brain says, I want that reward. I am going to work really hard to get that reward. And in the very process of working really hard to get that reward, guess what state the child's brain is in? You got it. A state of stress. So he's actually stressed out. So he's using his window of tolerance. And I mean, he is holding it together. See, what we don't realize within the matrix is that the only way a child is able to make it 2 weeks without any major behavior meltdowns is because his parents, his home, his family has created and given him an opportunity to develop a window of tolerance strong enough to really force himself to hold it together. So what we don't realize is that for 2 weeks, he's holding it together. And I know he screwed up. The therapist said he screwed up, but they still made some concessions for him. So he held it together for 2 weeks, more or less. And so finally the big day comes and he gets to go to Universal Studios with all the other students. All the other students who probably had very few issues holding it together to get their points and rewards. But not him. He screwed up. He still got to go. He held it together. So he goes to Universal Studios with all these other peers. And inside the matrix, he says he should be grateful. Now he gets the reward. He should behave right. But when you operate outside of the matrix, you realize that he's already exhausted. His window of tolerance is already so small, and that every adult around him, see, in my brain, every adult around him should know by now that he doesn't do well with peer interaction. Every adult around him should know by now, surely they understand that this is a child who struggles with transition. Every adult around him by now should understand that this is a kid who has poor impulse control. But they're all operating within the matrix. And within the matrix, you don't even think about those things. So he gets to Universal Studios and he's given the run of the land like every other child. And he's completely stressed out. Boom, his window of tolerance is shut. So all stress is bigger than what he can handle. All stress falls outside of his window of tolerance, is much bigger than what he can handle. And guess what he does? He goes and takes something. He steals something. Why does he steal? He steals because stealing is an external attempt to soothe an internal state. See, you don't understand that inside of the matrix. You only understand that when you operate outside of the matrix. So stealing is an external attempt to soothe an internal state. So he takes that one thing to get some stimulation, to get some relief, to help modulate and regulate the excitement that he's already experiencing. He just needs a little something else. And then he gets caught. And then it all goes to shit. And then he gets blamed. Well, see, that's all operating within the matrix. When you operate outside the matrix, he doesn't get blamed. The adults have to take responsibility. Oh, God, it's so scary. When you operate outside of the matrix, the adults have to look at him and say, oh my gosh, I cannot believe we set you up like that. Because his brain is not 16 when he's stressed. His brain is 5. He's a 5-year-old with a lot of other adolescent children. And we let him go and run around unattended. And we know he's got poor impulse control. We know he doesn't do well with peers. We know he doesn't do well with transition. And yet we let him go anyway. And then we blame him. And that's what happens inside of the matrix. And that's how behavior modification is its own special form of punishment. Because children get set up to fail. The actual striving to achieve the reward is stressful in and of itself. So when they finally get to attain it, they're already exhausted. They're already exhausted. So once they attain it, they probably just melt down completely. And then we wonder, well, why'd you melt down? You got the reward. That's all inside of the matrix thinking. Outside of the matrix says we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to be more mindful, more conscious, and more understanding of the children we are raising. And when they screw up, it is not their fault. It is our responsibility to figure out how we fell short in helping them stay within their window of tolerance to be able to succeed. We set children up for failure instead of success, because what they could have done is had an aide with him, recognized how sensitive his system is. They see him every single day. They raise this kid they're teaching this kid every single day. His school counselor could have walked beside him. He could have had an aide with him. Maybe not right beside him, but just 5 feet. Just be mindful. It doesn't require a lot to just be mindful when you're being mindful. But when you're operating inside of the matrix, you're not being mindful. Let me see. Ashley Marie asks, any specific feedback for people who feel their children don't have trauma but have behavior issues because of autism or intellectual disabilities? So that's a very good question, Ashley Marie. Any specific feedback for people who feel their children don't have trauma but have behavior issues because of autism or intellectual disabilities? I would say just because a child is autistic or just because a child has intellectual disabilities, they've already experienced a level of stress in their life that is ultimately traumatic. And especially if they don't have an opportunity to express, process, and understand. So before I would just rule out, and let's go ahead and say, yes, they're on the autism spectrum. Let's go ahead and say they have intellectual disabilities. Before we just rule out that there's no trauma, and you don't have to identify with trauma. The only thing that trauma does, when I give you a framework of trauma, all I'm giving you is a framework of understanding that your child is stress sensitive and fearful. So when I answer that question, is there any specific feedback? I'm going right back to the young man, the example I just talked about. See, within the matrix, we treat these children a certain way. And really the way in which we treat them is expecting them to know things, even with autistic children. And my first work as a social worker was with autistic individuals. I was responsible for helping a young man get placed, one of the first children in the state of Oklahoma getting placed in an autism treatment center in San Antonio. And so we automatically have this perception that they should know these things because we've shown them or we've told them. And we're still alleviating ourselves. When you're operating within the parenting matrix, you alleviate yourself of responsibility. And my specific feedback, Ashley, is slow down, commit to patience and repetition, and bring your instruction down to a level that meets their emotional age. Bring your instruction down to a level that meets their emotional age. Commit to patience and repetition and bring your instruction down to a level that meets their emotional age. If you will do that, and you'll do that consistently, you will start to see breakthroughs in your relationship with your child who has autism and who has intellectual disabilities. The conflict you're experiencing right now, the frustration you're experiencing right now, is you're trying to address your child on a level they are not. You have to come down to their emotional age, their emotional level, and you have to use your patience and your faith and your repetition. Repetition is the hard one. To go in and strengthen and solidify the fragile foundation that they operate on. And that's how you get growth with that child. So there are lots of everything I talk about applies across the board. Sometimes it's just slowing it down, bringing the information down to the emotional age of the child. Nate says, using methods that produce stress or fear to deter behaviors caused by stress or fear is mind-boggling. Keep preaching the truth, Big Papa. Thank you, Nate. It is mind-boggling when you exist outside of the matrix. But when you exist inside of the matrix, it's not mind-boggling because you don't realize that you're stressed. Inside of the matrix, we don't realize that we are stressed. Therefore, we are stressing out our children. Inside of the matrix, you don't realize that you are afraid and in a fearful state. Therefore, you don't realize that you are generating stress and fear for your children because the wool is pulled over your eyes from generations of false conditioning. That's why we don't see it. When Big Papa says in times of stress, your thinking is confused and distorted and your short-term memory is suppressed, I'm just repeating what a neuroscientist said. Joseph Ledoux, New York University, author of The Emotional Brain. In times of stress, your thinking is confused and distorted and your short-term memory is suppressed. When you are stressed, you're not thinking clearly. You are irrational. And you don't remember that just yesterday or just an hour ago, you did the exact same thing. And now an hour later, a day later, you are getting the exact same result. And that's what Einstein said is the definition of insanity. The matrix, operating within the parenting matrix, is an effort in insanity. We are crazy. We are doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I'm inviting everyone to join me for 28 days to break through the matrix. 28 days. I'm going to give you my heart and soul and mind and courage and my faith, and I'm going to hold your hand for 28 days starting February 1st, and we're going to break through the matrix. And you have to ask yourself, it's $49. $49 to join other parents and professionals who want to break through the matrix and have access to me every single day, as much as you need it. So if you need help, ask yourself this question. Are you ready to do something different? Because I'm making it available. Just go to theparentingmatrix.com and you make a choice. Red pill, blue pill. Red pill, blue pill. Blue pill, everything stays the same. You keep showing up and watching Big Papa and getting the same results because the matrix, the wool of the matrix is still pulled over your eyes. Red pill, we're going to go down the rabbit hole. Do something amazing. Remember, guys, in any given situation, you always have two choices. You have a blue pill, which is stress, fear, generations of conditioning of stress and fear and overwhelm and shame and blame and threatening and yelling and points and rewards and consequences and medication and diagnosis. That's fear. That's a fear choice. You're choosing fear because it's the easiest thing to do. It's the easiest, yet it's the hardest. It's the easiest, yet it's the hardest. To live in an uncomfortable state of discomfort. Or you have the red pill, which is slowing down, taking a few deep breaths, becoming more mindful, becoming more conscious, taking to heart what you are hearing, challenging the matrix that you have lived and been conditioned in, and then breaking through. And that's choosing love. God bless each and every one of you. I pray for you every night. I pray for you every night. I pray that when you lay your heads down and while you sleep, the cells of your bodies will release all the stress of the generations, all the fear, all the strongholds. And that when you wake up in the morning, you will be revived, reinvigorated, re-energized, and restored. And ready to make it a phenomenal day, a day different than this day. This day is gone. This day is gone. So let those worries leave with this day. Tomorrow, let's do something different. God bless you. Big Papa loves you. See you tomorrow.